And so the Victorian era spans that huge amount of time, but there's different periods of the Victorian era. We usually divide it up into three: early, mid, and late Victorian. And Deere Wiman House is definitely started off in the mid and lives into the late Victorian era. So, Christmas traditions at Overlook and Hillcrest. As I said, we're going to predominantly look at Overlook, but I do have a few stories about Hillcrest, very few, that I'll throw in at some point. But as I mentioned, Overlook, and as Lisa mentioned, built in 1872, pure Victorian in design, from that mid-period, designed by William LeBaron Jenney. And then Hillcrest, built in 1892, definitely heading into more the later Victorian period. Now, doing this program on December 1st is especially perfect because today, December 1st, was traditionally known as Sled Day, which means that people traditionally would prepare their sleigh and everything that went with it for the coming season. So the sleigh was gotten out, the runners cleaned, the sled cleaned, the sleigh bells cleaned and prepared and polished, so everything was ready. This is one of my favorite photos that we have in our collection. It shows Charles Deere driving a sleigh with Mary Deere in the back down 15th Street in Moline. Now, it's even more appropriate that I'm sharing this picture today with you because next week, we're going to have a new video up on our YouTube channel where each month I do a curator's pick, where I take some artifact and delve a little more deeper into it. And what I chose this month was this photograph. And so you'll be able to learn a little more about how I was able to date this photograph. Now, the Deeres, the Deere Wiman House, or Overlook, was the home of Charles Deere. Whoops, I hit something too fast there. Let me back up. We've got Charles Deere here on the left, Mary Deere, their oldest daughter, Anna, and their youngest daughter, Catherine. The girls were ages 6 and 8 approximately when they moved into the house. So this shows them as adults, probably from the 1880s. How did they decorate the house? We're not really sure, but I will share a couple pictures that we have as we go along. Now, of course, we always say that Victorian era started, and the Christmas traditions we're familiar with started with Queen Victoria, who became queen in the late 1840s. And she married Prince Albert. As Lisa said, he was from Saxon, he was German. And we commonly see this etching here on the left. And then there's multiple versions of that original etching. Albert brought the tradition of a Christmas tree from Germany to England upon his marriage. And this etching went worldwide. People all over the world saw the traditions that this family was doing here in England. Notice that it's a tabletop tree. That was what was commonly used. My feeling is, from what I've read, the idea of a floor to ceiling Christmas tree That's purely American. We like bigger is better. And I think that was what happened with the Christmas tree. In Windsor Castle, another etching of their Christmas tree. One quote I found said that they had 30 lighted candles per foot of tree. That's a whole lot of candles, a whole lot of flame going up. But I'm sure, like from other things I've read, that didn't mean that it was lit all day like we often do in our homes today. I know that here in America, I've read stories where a tree might be lit once everybody came in the room. You all oohed and ahed, and then it went out. You always kept a bucket of water and a stick with a sponge on it that you could dip in the water and hit a branch or a candle quickly to make sure that it was out. Feather trees were introduced as early as the 1850. That's because as the tradition of the Christmas tree grew, we know that there was quite a conservation problem in Germany. They began worrying about the deforestation of the land. And so they came up with a feather tree made out of goose feathers usually. And those were attached to the sticks, dyed green. We don't have any record that the Deere family ever had a feather tree, but they were popular in the US, and you can still occasionally find an antique one in stores, and you can even buy new ones today. But I thought that was interesting that quite early on, at least Germany was worried about it. Here in America, we have found records of tree farms beginning to appear in the late 1800s. So we were already thinking, okay, grow a field of trees that you can sell for families to come out and pick one out. Garland was also very, very popular. The evergreens with yards and yards of roping that was mainly used by the wealthy. And by the 1890s, definitely later than this picture, we know that churches left behind the earlier thinking of seeing Christmas decorations as sinful. Early on, when things began to explode in the US and around the world, especially in the South, you saw decorations everywhere. You saw the use of fireworks, tin horns. It was a huge celebration. The churches were a little anti that. I think it was that Puritan thinking where that was considered sinful. But by the 1890s, churches got on board with the idea and they started drenching the churches with greens. And once electricity became available, they added lights and glitter. Now, before electricity, and that would have been when the Deere Wiman house was built, because it did not get electricity until at least 1890. We know that trees were lit by candles, which was definitely a fire risk. It wasn't unusual to see candle holders like this. The one on the left, you've got a weighted ball to keep that candle upright. Here's a variety of them, weights to keep it level, and then the clip variety here on the right. But By 1882, electric lights did come into popularity. And by 1870s, prior to the electric lights, there was a patent for tree stands. So tree stands came in quite early. And this patent for the tree stand revolved. You had to wind it up and it would revolve and play music. Early on, this one to me looks like would be quite an early version where the electric lights would have hooked up to the ceiling fixture. You didn't have the cord running here, the cord had to run up and to the light fixture. Candles, though, are definitely more romantic, even though there is a risk. And I did find one memory that connects to John Deere that came from a relative of John Deere, Nellie Ball Rossborough. Her father's mother was related to John Deere's wives. And she said in John Deere's day, it was a beautiful frame dwelling. We know John Deere's house in Moline's not a beautiful dwelling quite yet anymore, but it fronted north with a beautiful view of the town and river valley below. It had spacious halls and large, high-ceilinged rooms. Downstairs, the rooms were separated by folding doors. Those folding doors stand out in my memory because when branches of the family gather there on Christmas Eve, the doors to the large front parlor were always closed and there was an air of mystery. From after what seemed like an endless wait, the doors were flung open and there stood a large and beautiful Christmas tree, all aglow with little lighted candles, and heaped about it a wonderful array of gifts for everyone. So again, they got the tree all lit, you all came in, you oohed and ahed, and then they probably put it out. Ornaments were totally handmade. This tree from the 1870s, 1860s maybe even, showed definitely everything was handmade, a lot of paper ornaments. But by the 1870s to 1910, that was really the golden era of Victorian Christmas ornaments. By the 1870s, the spun cotton Santas were a very popular cottage industry. And when I say cottage, I mean that people, women mainly, made them at home and then sold them on the market. The jolly red suited Santa is definitely an American tradition. Early on, like this one here, Old Saint Nick, lots of different names for him. But beginning in the 1890s, Santa began operating out of the North Pole for the first time. And in 1899, Mrs. Santa Claus appears. So both quite early. Of course, beautiful printed, embossed paper ornaments came into fashion. And that's because there was a new printing process. Chromolithograph printing was very popular, and that produced really wonderful colors. So ornaments were made from scraps that were cut out of those chromolithographs and then added tinsel and other elements to them to make these beautiful ornaments. So here's just a variety of wonderful ornaments. 1860s here in the US, they added those scraps with the tinsel, but often had a patriotic theme. So you saw a lot of red, white, and blue. Small flags were used on here, and Lady Liberty like this one. You also use those chromolithographs and scraps to create cornucopias that could be filled with candy, or little crackers. These you could pull each end apart. You also saw little glass blown ornaments added in with scraps here, like the birds, adding feathers to them. And the look-alike bird using the different feathers. I remember some of these from my childhood. We had them on our tree. We had to keep them up pretty high because our cat liked to go after them. But in 1890, Woolworths here in the US really cornered the market of store-bought ornaments. And that's when the ornament market really exploded here in the US. And what Woolworth did was he went to Germany, and he purchased from this area of Germany 200,000 glass blown ornaments to sell in Woolworth stores back in the state. Can you imagine? And a lot of these ornaments were made in this region in small shops, or were partly cottage industry, where the glass might be blown in one location, and then they were taken to different homes where women would adorn those balls. So here is a wonderful glass umbrella, and then it was probably shipped to a home or taken to a home where they added the wire and the tinsel to it. Here's another glass ball decorated. And then a variety of ornaments like this came out of Germany. The glass blown with the paintwork on them. And another type of ornament that came out of this region were called kugels. And that's spelled Kugal. I've never found one in an antique shop. I don't look real hard. I have found some copies of them. They were quite heavy, and especially the round ones were quite large. These look a little more normal size, but some of the kugels were, I've read, quite heavy. And then hot air balloons, or dirigibles, became popular in the late 1800s. Again, these were blown glass and then decorated with the wire and the tinsel. And by the late 1800s, we started seeing more metal come into ornaments. And transportation was the popular shape for these late 1900 ornaments. So again, dirigibles, trains and streetcars and carriages were very popular. So we've got hot air balloons and the lithographs coming in with the bright colors, all combining to create some wonderful, colorful ornaments for the Victorian trees. And here you see a tree from 1880 to 1890, and you can see that tinsel was big. And then these round balls, definitely Kugels, probably purchased through Woolworths. Now, how does that compare to the one picture we have of a Christmas tree at the Deere Wiman house? This I date to the late 1890s. Definitely lots of Kugels on the tree, strands of tinsel and beads. And the reason I date this picture to the late 1890s is because of this toy boat underneath the tree. I'll explain that in just a minute. And then also look, there's white cotton under the tree. You can't really see, it looks like there might be electric lights on this tree. It's definitely possible by the 1890s. But we, on our tree now, we just use the candles. Why did I date it late 1890s? Because of that toy boat. I thought, okay, who in the family would want a toy boat for a Christmas present? And the period that made the most sense was the period that Anna, Charles, and their two sons lived in the house along with her parents for a period. Here's Charles Wiman, and there's Dwight Wiman. Now let's talk just a few minutes about Christmas cards, because we do have a good example of one of the family Christmas cards. We know that Christmas cards can be traced to England in 1843, and they were first seen in the US in 1851. In the 1860s, they slowly grew in popularity in part to that new printing process that I mentioned, the chromolithograph, which produced those wonderful colors. And then people were able to cut them up and use them to decorate their handmade ornaments. By the 1880s, it really began to pick up speed. And the biggest surge in cards came in the late 1890s with free rural postage delivery. Then in 1900, they jumped again with the Christmas postcard. Now, this is the one card that I definitely know was a card from the family, and that was from William and Catherine Butterworth. Dates after the Victorian era, but I like to show it because it is the one Christmas card we have. Not too long ago, I did purchase a card that was sent by the Butterworths to someone, and I haven't taken a picture of it yet to include. It doesn't include anything from the house. I do have a card from the Wiman house that I think is a Christmas card that just showed a drawing of the front entryway at Deere Wiman. But the house today, how do we decorate Deere Wiman? Well, traditionally, we have an event called 19th Century Christmas on the first Sunday of December. And that includes Deere Wiman and Butterworth Center and the Education Center and the Carriage House, with cookies and punch and music and lots of decorations and kids' crafts. Well, that wasn't going to happen this year. So we're revamping that and are keeping our fingers crossed on whether we'll be able to open for Christmas at Deere Wiman House only, starting December 9th through the 20th. There's a link for signing up. It's pre-registration only on the homepage of our website. We're keeping our fingers crossed. We're not sure if we're going to be able to go ahead with this. and there aren't too many slots still open. So if you're gonna gamble that we're gonna have the event this year, be sure and go on to our homepage and click on that link to register. But the dining room is just a perfect example of late mid-Victorian, 1890s woodwork, hand-painted wallpaper, and a lot of original furniture to 1872. And we decorate with china that belonged to the family. One tradition that the Wiman daughters told me that the Wiman family did was to have a small wrapped package at each place setting at Christmas dinner. So a little gift for each person at the table. So I thought that was a cool tradition to continue. We also try to do a few foods, depends on what I feel like making that year. One year, I decided that, hey, I think I'll make sugar plums. And that's a good traditional Victorian candy. And so I found a recipe which required me to buy prunes, uh, hollow out the prunes so there was a pocket in it. And then you created a mixture of a lot of confection sugar and a variety of other things. So it was kind of like a white sugary paste. And then you were to stuff that inside the sugar plum or the dried prune, then roll it in granulated sugar. Uh, Talk about a headache trying to make those. And I thought, never again am I making these. Then several years ago, I found another recipe that meant grinding up a variety of dried fruits and then molding it into a small ball and then rolling those. Much easier to do and actually pretty good to taste. They aren't quite as sweet as those others were. Traditionally, a sugar plum didn't always include plums in it. That one had dried prunes, which is a plum, but this recipe I think was a little more traditional. No plums at all in it. Another thing that I found reference to was candied orange peel, which I make and put at each place setting. And also I found a reference in the Victorian era that red hots were quite popular. I also found reference to a candy, I think that was fairly small, like Red Hots, but they were called candied pigs. I've never found a good description of what that was. I usually do a mincemeat pie because it was traditional English, and we know that the Deeres, the Butterworths, the Wimans were all English descent. Another thing that I've tried making over the years is steamed plum pudding. Again, plum pudding had no plums in it. But that was a very traditional English tradition that was brought here to the United States. And usually tradition states that plum pudding was created a good 4 weeks before Christmas because it had to ferment for a while to really have a good taste. So the dining room at Deere Wiman, we do feature a lot of greens, traditional from that Victorian era. The table set with all the finest china and silver. We don't have any good pictures of good arrangements that they would have used in the center of the table. I ended up going with the apple and pineapple, which is a little more southern tradition. The pineapple, a sign of welcome, but it was used in the North also. And we also know that the last Mrs. Wyman was from the South. So I thought that was appropriate. We also have our joy made out of greens hanging in the window. These were usually called Christmas mottos, and sometimes they were cut out of paper, like a string of paper doll chain, and would be strung across an entryway in the room. I've seen pictures of them hanging across an archway. The ones I've seen from historic photos usually said Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. And I thought it would be nice to do that, but I needed something short. I didn't want to spell out Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas. So I came up with Joy, and it really always looks great in the window. The house itself, of course, we can drive about the Quad Cities now and see wonderful light shows, coordinated with music and lots of blow up figures and yards. We don't have any record that the Deers or the Butterworths ever did that. And, when electric lights first came out, they weren't capable of being outdoor lights. Was pretty special to see them inside. But one tradition that we think the Wymans did, we're not sure if this was a Deere tradition too, but one time we had an older gentleman years ago on a tour, and he said he remembered as a young man delivering Christmas trees to the property. And he said that they would line the driveway, this driveway all the way up to the house, both sides, with 6-7 foot evergreens. They weren't decorated with lights or anything. They just staked those trees up the driveway. I'm guessing maybe every 6 feet or so. So socially distant trees. But those Christmas trees really would have been neat to see. We also know that these cast iron urns, we have 2 of them on the property, and then the urns up on the porch and around several sides of the house that the family traditionally put like 2-foot evergreens in each of those pots. And that's something that we still do. So that's a nice tradition that we've been able to carry on. The only other interior photo that I have from the earlier period is from the Wyman period. This is Mary Jane Wyman, the oldest daughter of Charles and Patty Wyman. She was born in the early 1920s. So this is probably 1940s, close, probably mid to late 40s. And it shows the living room today. This is where we keep our big tree now, but it looks like they had 4 evergreens, probably like the ones lining the driveway, packed into this. I don't think they were going to decorate these. Maybe they were as part of the party, but they definitely had them packed together. And then the wreaths hanging in the windows. But this is the Christmas tree that we traditionally do now at Deere Wyman House. As I said, we go for mid-Victorian 1870s, before electric lights. And everything is pretty much handmade. We do have some walnuts that are gilded that hang on ribbon for the tree, little bags of candy, and a variety of handmade items that would have been suitable as gifts. And so the idea was that by the end of Christmas Day, your tree might be kind of bare because people would drop in to visit, or family would come by, and you would just pick something off the tree to give them as a gift. So a ladies' fan, paper fan was popular. Those bags of candy for children, maybe a potpourri ball that a lady would like for her dresser drawer, cornucopias filled with candy. What little like this right here, that was a little pin cushion, be a good gift for a lady. And what would you give the men? Not an unusual thing, be a stack of little squares of fabric, just leftover fabric from a sewing project that you would cut into little squares and stack them up and tie them with a ribbon. Now, when I ask school groups, who would want a little stack of fabric and what would you use them for? They never can come up with the idea. But in this early and mid-Victorian period, that would be the perfect gift for a child's father, because you had ink pens, not ballpoint ink, but ink pens that you had to dip in a bottle of ink to write with. And so you would definitely need scraps of fabric. Didn't have a box of Kleenex. Scraps of fabric to clean off your tip of your ink pen. And so scraps of fabric came in handy, and that was a useful gift. I doubt that the Deeres ever needed that type of, I'm sure they had a staff member that kept their pens clean for them. We also are lucky that we have some children's items that belong to the family. This giraffe is from the 1890s. The dolls are from the probably about 1870. The little washstand, 1840s, and a few other rocking chairs from the 1870s also. So I've shared with you just a little bit about Victorian Christmas traditions, and also the family traditions that we know a little bit about. At this point, I think that's my old end cap, 19th century Christmas. But again, remember, we're praying and hoping that we can do Christmas at Deere Wiman House. We're doing 10 days, December 9th through the 20th, 10 different dates that you can find on our website, a link to register for those. We are keeping it limited to just 10 people per entry time to try to meet guidelines. And we've got quite a few of those slots sold out. So you probably need, if you're going to register, scroll down to, I think it's like December 16th through the 20th. There's a few extra dates in there. Goodbye, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday.